the 1200 CA permit evaluation report, which is a guidance document for DEQ inspectors so that the guidance for inspecting projects will be consistent over time and with different inspectors. And this dialog box includes also DEQ's response to comments, as there were many comments and frequently asked questions during the finalization of the permit language. So look on the ODOT Erosion and Sediment Control webpage and find this information and read the permit. The 1200 CA coverage is required for all projects that disturb 1 acre or more of ground. This include the staging area or the anticipated staging area in the disturbance area calculations. For projects with in-water work and that have DEQ's 401 coverage, subtract the area below ordinary high water from the disturbance area calculations for the 1200 CA. Stuff that's covered in the 401 is already covered, so there's no double dipping on the permits there. The 1200 CA coverage is not required for the following: projects that are strictly ADA projects, so ramp and sidewalk projects that are exclusively ramp and sidewalk projects are excluded. Work that only exposes base aggregates is excluded. The disturbance that the 1200 CA is concerned with is disturbance of soil. So base aggregate exposure does not trigger the 40 or the 1200 CA coverage. Contracts where more than 1 acre of ground is disturbed, but the nodes of work are separated. For example, we might have signage projects that, as an aggregate, have more than 1 acre of ground disturbed, but the 1 acre could be spread over several miles, so each node of work would be less than 1 acre, and that will not require the 1200 CA coverage. And another way of looking at that is if the areas of work are sufficiently distant that separate staging areas are used. Again, that would be an indicator that the 1200 CA is not required. All work on all our projects must maintain good housekeeping, and DEQ has a MS4 permit that covers work that is not covered by the 1200 CA. So be aware that if the project's not covered by the CA, still need to work clean and responsibly. New projects with disturbed areas over 5 acres must accommodate a 14-day public review period into the schedule.
Just to let you know, I had like this computer plugged in the wrong thing.
Hey man, you're on
mute. There you go.
Humans, what are you going to do? Anyway, new projects that disturb more than 5 acres must accommodate the 14 public review period into the schedule. Projects that are over 5 acres that are already under construction did not have a public review period. So we need to develop the ESCP, the Erosion and Sediment Control Plan, that is compliant with the Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ's requirements. And so we've updated our erosion and sediment control checklist to help provide guidance in that regard. The checklist is located in the ODOT Erosion and Sediment Control webpage in the Erosion Control Guidance Materials dropdown, and under Guidance Materials in the Manuals directory. So you can find the checklist there, and you can find also the cover sheet template is in the same directory. The cover sheet is a microstation file, and it is built in 3 models for 3 separate sheets. The first sheet will provide direction for the designer, the erosion and sediment control plan designer, to infill information that should be available during the design process. The second sheet of the cover sheet is providing the DEQ required notes. And the third sheet of the cover sheet is providing blank spaces and guidance for the contractor to provide information that would not be known during the design process. So designers infill the cover sheet to the fullest extent possible. The contractor must supply the remaining information after the bid is awarded. During design, you can duplicate the project site and vicinity maps, infill the work phase BMP matrix. It's in the upper right-hand corner of the first sheet, and provide the site and project information in a simple narrative. Be aware that ProjectWise has a cover sheet directory, so once the cover sheet is edited, it can be loaded into ProjectWise. The cover sheet numbering, it will be DEQ 01 through DEQ 03, as opposed to the FB series, which is what is commonly used for erosion and sediment control plans. Note that I have struck out the stamp block. The cover sheets are not part of the contract documents, and these are not stamped. These are not developed by the professional of record. So these are not stamped drawings. So in developing the cover sheet narrative, the narrative is a short, non-technical, simplified overview of the project. In the narrative, provide the purpose and need, provide as many of the items in the permit sections 15.4.e and 15.4.f as feasible. Some of the listed items will not apply to our project. Note the adjacent land uses. They could be agricultural or rural or urban or mixed commercial, etc. Note the property ownership. This will usually be on ODOT right-of-way with easements. Note the site impacts. It could be tree removal, grading, etc. And coordinate the narrative with other cover sheet entries, which require site information. So to provide an overview of the existing conditions, the construction impacts, and the final conditions. And then keep the narrative simple and try to keep it to 1 paragraph. Provide in the erosion and sediment control plan submittal, the cover sheet. The cover sheet 3 provides blank lines for the contractor to list potentially polluting materials and activities. Lists of water bodies within 1 mile of the project and their 303 impairment status. Anticipate the non-stormwater discharge, such as fire hydrant flushing or irrigation system flushing. Note the buffer zones if the project is adjacent to water. If treatment is used to neutralize contaminated materials, get approval from DEQ prior to use of that system. We will need to provide an EMP if contaminants are known to be on the project site. You need to provide the standard drawings that are referenced in the plan sheets, the erosion and sediment control plan sheets. Provide the 280 standard specification and the special provision. And then because DEQ wants to know what the seed mix is for final stabilization, provide the 1030 special provision. So to provide the seeding. The erosion and sediment control plans will now need to be developed to represent each phase of construction. Convey on the phased plan sheets where grading is revised, Flow arrows can provide that information. And differentiate between BMPs to install and BMPs to remain in place from the previous phase. The showing of BMPs that are to remain from the previous phase can be done by shading them or graying them out and then not drawing attention to them with the keynotes. So develop the erosion and sediment control plans aligned with DEQ's requirements. Phase plans must have labels identifying the phases of work as described in permit section 15.3. DEQ's identified phases of work are the following. A is demolition, clearing, grading, and earthwork. B is streets and utilities. C is vertical construction, and D is final landscaping and site stabilization. Well, DEQ's phases described land development and not linear construction. ODOT's phases of work follow ground disturbance. So to stay aligned with DEQ's requirements, but represent ODOT's phasing of work, some DEQ labels may not apply. For example, when a DEQ phase does not apply, such as no vertical construction, note that in the narrative. Most ODOT projects combine phases A and B into a phase of demolition, earthwork, and streets and utilities, which may be conducted in different stages as work moves around the project. So explain the phases of work in the cover sheet narrative and use identical phase of work labels as in the cover sheet phase of work BMP matrix. Phase labels on the matrix must match the phase labels in the erosion and sediment control plan sheets. Develop the erosion and sediment control plans aligned with DEQ requirements. The final phase, you show seeding, mulching, and all final site stabilization in the final phase. It's worth recalling that section 280.70 in the specifications requires removal of all temporary BMPs. But our final phase plan sheets, for example, if we've got straw wattles in the final phase, we are not showing a final phase with all those structural BMPs removed. They will be removed as required by the contract, but it's been directed by the state engineer that we're not developing a special sheet set just for a hatching that represents seeding. The FA series, which is roadside development, when used, when we've got a planting plan for the project, should have the final stabilization label added and included on the sheet.
Hey, Bob.
Hey.
There's a question in the chat. Can you confirm separate plans are required for the DEQ phases, not the traffic control / construction stages and phases?
Yes, that is correct. For ODOT work, however, it is worth looking at the traffic control stages as an indicator of where the disturbance is migrating around on the project. Like I said, the phases of work that DEQ identifies, demolition, clearing, grading, earthwork, streets and utilities, vertical construction, and final landscaping and site stabilization, they just don't correspond to the way our projects work. So the traffic control plans can provide a reference as to how disturbance is actually moving around the project. the labels can still correlate with the DEQ labels and may be combined, as I noted, that earthwork and streets and utilities could be combined into one phase, and those phases can follow the phasing of work as identified in the traffic control plans, but the traffic control plans are not a gospel as to how the work is moving around on the project site. So you have to talk with the project leader and just be aware of how the project is sequenced.
Ian,
And I appreciate, go ahead.
Ian, did that answer your question? Oh, yep.
Excellent, excellent. And we appreciate the questions. We have had this, we're moving along really quickly right now. So if you've got questions, please bring them forward. I'm happy to stop and discuss it. So anyway, final phase could be just the final phase of erosion and sediment control with seeding, or the final phase might be the introduction of the FA series, which is a planting plan to the ESCP. So the environmental management plan is identified in Appendix A. And Appendix A includes the contaminated media management plan guidelines, the contaminated media management plan application, an active chemical treatment systems guidelines, and the active chemical treatment management plan application. When contaminants are known to be on site, designers will be working with ODOT hazmat. And ODOT hazmat can identify the type and depth and location of contaminants that are on the project site. When contaminants are known or found during construction, the contractor is responsible for developing the environmental management plan, the method for treatment or location of the approved disposal site. These are means and method that are owned by the contractor. All work associated with contaminated materials shall comply with Section 290, and work must immediately stop in locations of found contaminants. Be aware that dirty shoulder soils do not trigger the requirement for an EMP. Dirty shoulder soils are already covered in a DEQ beneficial use determination. That's a BUD. And so not to be concerned if dirty shoulder soils are identified on the project site. The environmental management plan will include a no work area of contaminated, no work in area of contaminated material is allowed until the EMP is approved by DEQ. Where contaminated material is found during construction, work must immediately stop in the location of the contaminants. Any use of treatment chemicals or flocculants require an EMP and approval from DEQ prior to use. ODOT generally hauls away contaminated material for disposal at approved facilities. Contaminated groundwater will require treatment. Treatment systems must be engineered and approved by DEQ prior to use, and there is a fee payment required for the EMP review and approval. And be aware that the fee payment also includes a payment service fee. So that's going to be about $970 for an EMP approval, and that is paid for through the YDO electronic portal. Another new requirement is that buffer zones are now required where work is adjacent to waters of the state. The buffer zone is required to be 50 feet, and where 50 feet of undisturbed vegetation is not available, there is guidance in Appendix B, which provides guidance as to BMPs that can be used to provide equivalent protection as a buffer zone. So again, requirements are provided in Appendix B. When a project is adjacent to water bodies, the erosion and sediment control professional of record will identify that buffer zone on plans as a no work area. The ESC professional of record will provide BMPs per guidance as outlined in Appendix B. Undisturbed vegetation or adequate right-of-way may be absent in this buffer zone. Redundant perimeter controls as outlined in Appendix B can satisfy the buffer zone requirements. DEQ wants us to verify the adequacy of the redundant BMPs by using the USDA's Revised Universal Soil Loss Equation version 2 software. That's the Russell 2 software. The Russell 2 software is approved and vetted by ODOT for use. So buffer zones get the same protection as other no work areas, and project adjacent to waterways where existing buffer zones are adequate or inadequate shall have additional BMPs in the design per Appendix B. So submittal of the freestanding erosion and sediment control plan to DEQ occurs at advanced plans. This submittal will occur via YDO, that's DEQ's Your DEQ Online electronic portal. So submit via YDO with the erosion and sediment control plan as complete as possible. And after using the ESCP designer's quality control checklist. The erosion and sediment control plan submittal to DEQ includes the cover sheets plus the erosion and sediment control sheets as provided in the bid set. Submittal to DEQ is a permit document, not a contract document. Cover sheets are not included in the bid set, but contractors must be able to access the cover sheet and must edit the cover sheet with the list of all contractors on site, the list of all pollutant generating activities and materials, such as paint, solvents, fuel, fertilizer, concrete, mold release, or curing compounds, etc. So I see that we have a couple of questions.
Yes.
Corey asked, what was the 30-foot reference on the buffer zone? That is the undisturbed vegetation. So you can see in this simple graphic that disturbance occurs within 20 feet of the 50-foot required buffer. So the 30 feet is undisturbed vegetation, and additional BMPs need to compensate for that 20 feet of disturbance within the buffer zone. And are ditches considered waterways that require buffer zones when the ditch itself drains to a waterway? No, the ditch, unless it's jurisdictional, the ditch, especially if it's in the project site, if the ditch is in the project site, then BMPs can be installed in that ditch, likely to be check dams and probably matting or something. But the ditch is not considered the waterway until it reaches the waterway. So back to submitting the freestanding ESP. This goes through YDO and advanced plans. ODOT will submit this through the YDO system. Contractors and design consultants should sign up to the YDO as consultants and as approved by an ODOT RO. So ODOT needs to bless the consultants in the YDO system. YDO consultants can access documents in the system, but not submit to the system. Submittal to the system infers a signature as an ODOT representative. Only YDO responsible officials, those would be ROs, can submit documents. Professionals of record, RECs, regional environmental coordinators, and resident engineers and environmental discipline leaders should sign on to YDO as ROs. Those would all be ODOT positions. And then ROs can be responsible officials for multiple projects. So when using the YDO portal, users sign in on the DEQ website. Sign in as either an RO or a consultant. DEQ needs to verify the RO status. So ODOT needs to submit a list of persons signed up as RO to me or Rod for forwarding. And then ROs need to verify consultant access for projects. At the bottom of this page, I grabbed a snippet of the DEQ website, and you can see the DEQ YDO online web address. So go on there. There is a tutorial. There is some there's a video that you can look at and become acquainted with the YDO portal. So in using the YDO portal, responsible officials start a new submittal from the left side of the dashboard. There needs to be naming convention with the first word as ODOT, then the project name as provided in the project title block. When you're using the YDO and downloading stuff, that's a simple drag and drop. And then the required submittals for the erosion and sediment control plan to DEQ, the required submittals are the initial ESCP, the environmental management plan when contaminants are known or found to be on site, revisions of the ESCP, and corrective action reports. Monitoring reports are not a required submittal unless asked for. On a project site, it's important to have the monitoring reports available and in chronological order and available for DEQ when asked. The 14-day public review period, ODOT submits to DEQ at advanced plans. The 14-day review period begins on the day that DEQ posts the project for review, not on the day that ODOT submits the project to DEQ. DEQ says there may be a few days between the submittal and posting. And I want to go back for just a second. Be aware that the initial submittal of the ESCP is to start the DEQ project file for this project. ODOT's 1200 CA permit is in good standing and in hand. And the initial submittal of the DEQ to DEQ is not required to initiate construction. So we've got the permit in hand and construction can start, and that's not dependent on this initial submittal of the ESCP. Comments from the public review period. The question is, how long does ODOT have to respond to the public review comments in the ESCP? And this depends on the complexity of the project. DEQ and ODOT will coordinate responses. Complexity and the number of comments are variable. The unknowns are why we are submitting to DEQ at advanced plans. DEQ does not expect many relevant comments on the erosion and sediment control plan. And they are filtering. I know that in the Portland area, there are detractors to ODOT work, and they might flame DEQ with comments that are not related to the erosion and sediment control plan. DEQ is filtering those out. Only comments which directly are relevant to the erosion and sediment control plan will even be reviewed. So in that regard, DEQ does not expect many relevant comments on the erosion and sediment control plan. Providing DEQ with an advanced list of potentially controversial projects will help the project or the process. Again, the public review period must be factored into the project schedule. If anyone needs go get a cup of coffee, I will take a break here. And why don't we start back up at 4:50? I need 8:50. What am I thinking? Let's take a little break here, 13 minutes. If you want to enter something into the chat, I'm not going anywhere. So I'm happy to look at questions, and I can enter anything into the chat as a response. Well, I think we've had enough time to refill the coffee cup and stretch our legs a little bit. So why don't we continue? So the cover sheets are bid reference documents. The cover sheets for the DEQ submittal are bid reference documents. The cover sheets for posting on eBids must be reduced sized PDFs. Prior to a project's advertisement dates, TPMs or RECPs must download cover sheets into the eBid system. If download occurs after the advertisement dates, the TPMs or RECPs will use a letter of clarification process. The bid reference document quick guide can be found at the web address noted at the bottom of this slide. So kind of to reiterate, the cover sheets are not part of the contract documents. They're part of the permit submittal. So the contract documents of the project are let per standard practice with no cover sheets, and the erosion and sediment control plan sheets are part of the contract plans with no cover sheet. The erosion and sediment control plans with the cover sheets are added to eBids as reference documents. The bid reference document guide requires editing to outline additional steps required of the cover sheets. And after the project is awarded, the contractor will infill the missing information on the cover sheets and provides to the RE's office for review and posting on Doc Express. So we've got a system here that the contractor will be aware of the cover sheets and their requirement to infill information, but they're kept separate from the contract documents. The contractor provided staging areas are unchanged from what is required on the previous permit. For a contractor acquired staging area, the contractor must acquire a 1200C permit. ODOT provides no oversight of the contractor's staging areas. DEQ does not require or expect ODOT to report on contractors' non-compliance at their staging areas. When the staging area is within ODOT right-of-way, they're covered by the agency's 1200 CA permit, and ODOT is responsible for the good housekeeping. Waste receptacles must be covered, stockpiles must be covered, perimeter controls and other erosion and sediment control BMPs must be intact and functioning, and materials properly stored. There are new requirements during construction. If a sediment trap is provided in a location where post-construction water quality basin is proposed, that sediment trap must have 18 inches of sediment and soil removed and replaced with material capable of satisfying stormwater management requirements for infiltration and or for water quality treatment. And allow no construction stormwater discharges to enter underground injection controls. Those are UICs. Tina asked, does the first page of the erosion and sediment control include a legend, the standard drawing list, general notes, even though the cover sheet has that information? And that is yes. And then Brookley asks, even if a contractor's staging area is on private property and the contractor has 1200C permit for that staging area, it is true. Is it true that the staging area still needs to be counted when calculating the total project area of disturbance? And yes, that is, it continues to be a requirement that DEQ has imposed. We have elevated this issue and into the Department of Justice, and it has not been resolved at that level. So until we are told otherwise, that kind of break with logic continues to stand. The contractor's staging areas on private property and covered by a separate permit, and that staging area needs to be included in the area of disturbance for the project. And I know that this is going to kick some of our smaller projects like bridge or culvert projects into providing all of these extra steps with the ESCP. So stand by when we get word from the Department of Justice as to their determination. We will make an announcement about that finding.
Yeah, I just want to add to that that is only the staging area, disturbed ground area that goes towards the project total disturbed area. The rest of the permit requirements under the 1200 CA are the contractor's responsibility under their permit. So our 1200 CA would not apply to their staging area that has a 1200 C. It's just the ground disturbance being added to the total project disturbance area. And as Bob mentions, we have elevated through DOJ at ODOT and at DEQ, and we've met and discussed that. We just haven't gotten to resolution yet. So more to come on that.
Yeah, and fingers crossed, it really does defy logic. So let's hope that the sane minds are paying attention. Okay, well, sediment traps and don't discharge into UICs. Engineered soils. Subgrade soils that are stabilized with cementitious material are engineered soils. Where the possibility of runoff exists from engineered soils, that runoff must be captured in a correctly sized sediment trap. And you can see in this slide, I have emphasized the term where the possibility of runoff exists. Where I have seen cementitious material used to stabilize subgrades, this stabilization occurs between 10 and 30 inches below the surrounding grade. So this would be below base rock, below pavement, and that kind of a broad trench, which is going to be the roadway prism. It is unlikely that runoff could occur from those situations. So pay attention to that when you are considering the capture of runoff from engineered soils. Runoff from engineered soils that are captured in a sediment trap must be tested for high pH. High pH water must have the alkalinity neutralized prior to discharge, and the neutralizing treatments must be approved by DEQ prior to use. Permit compliance during construction is not significantly different than it has been under the old permit. So with best practices are followed and BMPs are installed correctly and BMPs on the plans are all installed, it should not be a problem complying with the permit. So we could do this. I know that the new requirements on paper look daunting, but we could do this. DEQ's high priority for non-compliances are sediment leaving the project site, turbid stormwater leaving the site, track out from the project onto public roads, turbidity in receiving water, uncovered stockpiles, missing or ineffective perimeter controls, non-compliance not properly addressed, and administrative non-compliance. The missing or ineffective controls regards BMPs that are shown on the plan and not installed in the field. So it's important that BMPs that are shown on the plans be installed and installed properly. And then administrative non-compliances are always a concern. DEQ will not penalize self-reporting, and it will not penalize a non-compliance if corrective actions are prompt and thorough. Request a clarification about the acronyms. What is being used? Okay, a BMP is a best management practice. That would be any structural erosion and sediment control feature. For example, straw wattles, compost socks, inlet protection, matting are all best management practices. In addition to evidence of erosion or discharge of sediment, the following are administrative non-compliances. BMPs shown on the plans are not installed. Monitoring not conducted per requirements. Monitoring reports not accurate or timely. Prohibited discharges not self-reported. Corrective action reports not accurate or timely. The erosion and sediment control plan not updated and submitted to reflect changes on the ground. DEQ depends on submittals to monitor project compliance. Without submittals, our compliance is suspect. So in addition to having features on the ground as they should be, all the paperwork also needs to be as it should be. So it is important to revise the erosion and sediment control plan to keep it representative of the site conditions, including when construction plans change, when site conditions change, or when BMPs change. The erosion and sediment control manager provides the erosion and sediment control plan revisions to ODOT within 7 days of the field change and for submittal to DEQ. The agency submits to DEQ within 30.
I took a picture of the.
Hey,
Hey,
Taya.
You're not on mute. Thank you.
There you go. Humans. So the ESCM provides the ESCP revisions to ODOT within 7 days of the field change for submittal to DEQ. Then ODOT submits to DEQ through the YDO portal within 30 days of the field revision. So anticipate additional tasks in the schedule and budget. ESCP revisions will likely be the largest task added to the work of ESCMs. So during design and establishing the project cost estimate, consider that the ESCMs will have additional tasks that will add to the budget. These should be accounted for. The contractor's ESCM duties will include to read the 1200 CA permit and keep the project site permit compliant, to visually monitor the site as follows: on the initial date, every 14 days, within 24 hours of storm events that result in stormwater runoff, and within 24 hours of snow melt that results in runoff. They need to visually monitor receiving waters, to mobilize crews to provide corrective actions, and to fill out the monitoring report and submit that to the agency. ORS 012-55 is a statute that reads failing to collect monitoring data is a Class 1 penalty. So that is a severe penalty if the monitoring is not provided as required. This is an interesting graph that was provided to me by Department of Environmental Quality. This is a graph that DEQ gathered from a weather station adjacent to a project site. And with this graph, DEQ was able to correlate rainfall events with monitoring reports. As I noted, the monitoring reports are not a required submittal, but DEQ can ask for them at any time. And when asked and provided those monitoring reports, DEQ can kind of desk monitor whether they are accurately representing rainfall events. So again, accurate monitoring reports are important because DEQ can be looking over our shoulders. Non-compliance requires self-reporting and corrective actions. Mistakes happen. Self-reporting a sediment discharge to DEQ will actually build trust. DEQ would be suspicious if conditions were always perfect. So within 24 hours of a non-compliance, the following must be provided. Provide a narrative of the non-compliance, provide photos of the discharge, clean up the sediment or the discharge, and provide plans for correcting the erosion and sediment control failure. Follow the non-compliance report with corrective action. Non-compliance requires immediate corrective actions. Address the conditions that caused the discharge, clean up the sediment contaminated left by the discharge, complete minor corrective actions by the close of the next business day. Install new or replacement EMPs required by the corrective actions within 24 hours. If completion of corrective actions within 24 hours is not feasible, document and schedule for implementation the corrective actions, and then revise the ESCP to reflect corrective action repairs within 7 days. I know that a lot of the attendees to this presentation are design consultants, but we also have consultant inspectors. So these non-compliance issues that occur during construction are still relevant to this audience. The corrective action report includes the site name and the project's permit ID number, the description and the cause of the non-compliance, photos of the discharge and of receiving water, period of the non-compliance, the names of the persons conducting the monitoring, the corrective steps taken and the timeline of the corrective action, the note of the weather that may have contributed to the discharge, and revisions of the ESCP to show the corrective action BMPs. So the corrective action results when a non-compliance is promptly self-reported, the discharge promptly cleaned up, and the cause of the discharge repaired in a timely corrective action and a timely corrective action report submitted, the event will not be considered a permit violation. Note the emphasis on timeliness. So in construction, the prime contractors must address maintenance and emergency situations without relying on subcontractors. It is important that designers provide in the special provisions adequate emergency materials, and it is equally important that during construction that the prime contractors use those emergency materials. I think it's relevant for this audience that the nature of emergency materials be identified, that these are products that could be stored on the project site and be readily deployed. So something like a compost sock that needs to be field fabricated would require the mobilization and delivery of bulk materials, whereas compost socks that are pre-filled and on a pallet could be immediately deployed without mobilization of special equipment. So in design, make sure that you're specifying emergency materials that the prime contractor can quickly install. Resident engineers must use available tools as to enforce the contract compliance. Contract through plans and specs direct the contractor to provide and maintain effective function of erosion and sediment control and permit compliance. Agency and consultant inspectors must see erosion and sediment control as important contracted work. This is work that is that's contracted and being paid for, so it's important that it is done. And that all personnel on project sites must be able to identify effective and ineffective BMPs and to say something if improvements in the effective function are needed. Continue to remember that the purpose of the 1200 CA is to protect the environment. This is a priority for ODOT and for really everybody in this presentation. So the permit is a good thing. It's kind of a difficult pill to swallow sometimes, but compliance with it is important and supports ODOT's values. The permit requires additional tasks. The erosion and sediment control manager has more duties. The threshold for monitoring after rainfall has changed. Stricter oversight of concrete wash and alkalinity in stormwater runoff is now in play. The environmental management plan are a new requirement. Sheets for each phase of construction are new requirements. Buffer zones are new requirements, and the DEQ YDO electronic portal required for new submittals is a new requirement. So ODOT's processes have changed. We have provided multiple edits to the 280 specifications. The consultant scope template has been revised. There have been revisions to the ODOT erosion and sediment control manual. Trainings for designers and construction staff have been provided. Scoping work for additional tasks in design and construction are revised. DEQ requirements requires the use of the YDO web portal. Drafting standards have adopted this new content, and a contract change order template, a CCO template for permit-driven contract changes is now available. And thanks, Rod, for identifying ESCM. That's, yes. The erosion and sediment control plans requirements are more stringent and include more administrative tasks. DEQ will be more involved in projects and provide closer scrutiny. The ESCM, the Erosion and Sediment Control Manager, will have more duties and responsibilities. And the erosion and sediment control installations and maintenance will not be significantly changed from the current best practices, but oversight will. And it's worth noting that DEQ knows that over the last 20 years, they have essentially kind of slacked off in their oversight of erosion and sediment control. And that in so doing, they have essentially trained contractors that nobody's looking. Well, now DEQ is looking, and that we can expect random unannounced visits to our project sites. So just something to be aware of. Consultants and contractors are ODOT's partners in environmental protection and permit compliance. So we are all on the same team in this. So the virtual meeting takes considerably less time than the in-person meeting. I really welcome any changes, and most of you on this meeting have my email address. The ODOT Erosion and Sediment Control webpage also has my contact information. So I continue to be available as a resource to you all. And I welcome questions either through the chat, or you can chime in if you've got questions you want to give voice to right now. So raise your hand if you've got some questions, and we'll hang out here a little bit longer to address questions that you may have. For what it's worth, a pile of tires as a shoreline reinforcement is not an approved BMP.
Guess you covered it pretty well, Bob.
I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and I will make a PDF of this presentation and email it to all the meeting attendees.
And I will be making sure that this recording gets also posted in the chat. It may take me a minute to figure that out because I haven't done it before, but I am recording, and we'll end it here when we're finished, and I will get it up in the chat at some point. All right, Bob. I guess folks don't have any further questions at the moment. Like Bob said, oh, there is one that just popped up. There was reference to new drafting standards. Where are those posted?
The drafting, what I meant by that, Tina, is that the new cover sheet templates are provided in that. The drafting standards are essentially the same, but within the agency, we have some drafters who are strict adherents to standards, and phased erosion and sediment control plans had not been accepted as an ODOT standard. But what I have presented here as far as oh, and thanks, Gary. What I have presented here is accepted by ODOT. It is worth noting, and I did mention this in the presentation, that the ESCP is the cover sheets plus the erosion and sediment control plan sheets from the contract documents. And these are printed onto PDFs for submittal to DEQ. So That's not exactly drafting standards, but it's part of the new suite of additional tasks that the permit's requiring. Yes, thank you for that, Gary. So I've got no qualms just hanging out a few minutes longer. But I
Anybody
can
else?
print this to PDF now.
Anybody else have any questions while we have Bob on the phone? Okay, if we don't have any further questions, we appreciate all of your time. And as Bob noted, he did put his email address in the chat. Feel free to reach out to either of us for questions that may come up after the fact. And we will get back to you as soon as we can. And some of those other items that were still kind of hanging out there, we will be hopefully getting answers to, and we'll get those in our manual or out to folks for sure to let them know where we ended up.
As Rod said, thank you very much for participating. I know that this has been, believe me, I know that this has been a real trial, but we're over the hump, so it's all good. I'm going to sign off now, and thank you all for your participation. Expect an email with the PDF of the training.
Thank you, everybody.